Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie, and in this video I'm going to be looking at the weekend of June the 21st and 22nd, 2025. The main event this weekend is the Summer Solstice. Well, Summer Solstice from a perspective of the Northern Hemisphere, and the Summer Solstice is when the Sun enters Cancer, the precise moment that this happens. It is also, in the Northern Hemisphere, the longest day, and it is the point where the Sun is at its highest declination, its northward declination above the celestial equator. And astrologically, the solstice is important, and in this video I want to look at the solstice in great detail. Well, maybe not great detail, I don't want to flatter myself, but in as much detail as my knowledge and the time available allows. But before I look at the solstice, I want to consider the astrology and I Ching for the weekend. So here is a chart of the weekend. By the way, don't forget to like and subscribe if appropriate. And so here is the chart for the middle of the weekend, midnight on Sunday the 22nd, set for New York. And the moon is at 15 degrees Taurus. So this weekend, the moon, it's out of Aries. In fact, it enters Taurus at 2:53 a.m. on Saturday, London time. So if you're in the Americas, by Friday night, the Friday evening, the sun will have entered. Sorry, the moon will have entered Taurus, and so by the middle of a weekend, the moon is well and truly in Taurus, close to a conjunction of Venus, and it makes a trine to Mars, it makes a sextile to Jupiter, it does that on Saturday, it makes a square to Pluto, and it makes a conjunction to Venus. It's a very nice aspect, moon conjunct Venus. It's in Taurus. The moon is exalted in Taurus. Venus is in its own sign in Taurus. So that is a very comforting aspect. It's a very stabilizing aspect. And yes, it's a very earthy aspect. And so, for many of us, this weekend can actually bring a degree of stability. But of course, we are living in difficult times, all of us, regardless of our sign. And one aspect we do have today, which could, this weekend, which could sort of destabilize things a bit, is Mars quincunx Neptune. That's on Saturday. So, there's Mars at 2 degrees Virgo. There's Neptune in Aries. So Mars and Neptune are making a 150-degree aspect. But probably you can see this Mars quincunx Neptune as part of a wider configuration. Saturn and Neptune are conjunct, and so Mars has just made the quincunx to Saturn, and now it's making the quincunx to Neptune. And so together, Saturn and Neptune, we could see that as being about fear, hesitation. We want to let go, but we don't want to let go because we're afraid of the consequences. Mars is us trying to do something, trying to get things off the ground, but something's holding us back. It might be our fears, and we might not know where we're going. Mars quincunx Neptune can be quite confusing. Things are not really as simple as we'd hoped they would be. We want to just act, but Neptune is asking us to be quite subtle about it, and we can't make assumptions. And additionally, the main thing going on this weekend is, of course, the Sun moving into Cancer. So the Sun moves into Cancer on Saturday, and of course, by definition, that is the summer solstice from the perspective of the Northern Hemisphere. That is, it is the longest day. Of course, if you're in the Southern Hemisphere, it's the shortest day. and possibly you should treat it as being the winter solstice. But it's just words. And yes, there is a northern hemisphere bias. And so with the sun moving into Cancer, well, that takes place at 3:42 a.m. London time. So that's last night, yesterday, if you're in the Americas. But still, it's important for all of us. It doesn't really matter, where our time zone is. And I'll be talking in greater detail about the solstice and the timings, and perhaps what it means from a symbolic perspective. Now, right at the end of a weekend, we actually have the sun having moved into Cancer. It makes a square to Saturn, and the Sun square Saturn, it's just quite a heavy aspect. Sun in Cancer, square Saturn in Aries. There are things we want to do. There are things we want to get off the ground. And Saturn is blocking us. And you could say that it's actually a fairly similar energy to Mars quincunx Neptune, which is also sort of really Mars quincunx Saturn, if you take Mars as being quincunx to the Saturn-Neptune conjunctions. Yeah, so Sun square Saturn can be frustrating. And Saturn's in Aries, and Saturn can be a problem in Aries. Aries is a dynamic sign, but Saturn wants to take things slowly and responsibly, and there can be a lot of frustration with that Sun square Saturn. But on the positive side, Sun square Saturn can be about sorting oneself out. And additionally, I think in that book by Charles Harvey, Nicholas Campion, and what's his name, Michael Bagent, I think they talk about Sun square Saturn's Sun square Saturn aspect. If I remember rightly, I might have got this wrong, but off the top of my head, they see this in terms of treaties. When people try to come to agreements, for example, arms limitation talks, you can get that with Sun square Saturn. So does this mean that we're going to see a deal between Israel and the United States? Between Iran and the United States? I shouldn't think so. But maybe we should see Sun square Saturn as being more individual. So if we've had a disagreement with someone, maybe Sun square Saturn can help us to patch things up or come to some kind of compromise. Of course, in terms of foreign affairs, we have no idea what's going on behind closed doors, and perhaps people are agreeing to things with Sun square Saturn, but I don't think we can really get our hopes up. And a lot of people are talking about this weekend as being a time when the United States might attack Iran. I don't know, that's not based on astrology, it's just what people are saying. Perhaps it's a chatter on the internet, but it could be a difficult weekend. But this is an astrology channel, it's not about political speculation. And so as far as Sydney, Australia is concerned, let's just look at that chart quickly, setting it for Sydney rather than New York as a representative of Australasia. And you can see that at midnight on Sunday, the moon is earlier in the sign. The moon is at 7 degrees Taurus. But still, we get the message. Moon is in Taurus for most of the weekend in Australia and New Zealand. Okay, this morning the moon might be in late Aries. So I don't think that there is really a huge amount of difference between the picture in Australasia compared with that in New York. And then there is the heliocentric view, putting things from a perspective of the sun as the center of the solar system, where it should be. I do think it's important to look at the heliocentric chart and to keep track of what's going on heliocentrically, because this is what the solar system really does look like. And astrologers who try to predict market movements and political events, they often do use heliocentric astrology, though I would not have said I'm a heliocentric sort of expert. Far from it. But so we can see in this heliocentric chart that the Earth is in Capricorn. I mean, that's obvious because the Earth is always opposition the Sun. So if the Sun has just gone into Cancer, that means that the Earth has just gone into Capricorn. And the Earth is making a square to Neptune, it's making an opposition to Jupiter, and it's starting to make a square to Mars. So again, we have a grand cross forming here, and this grand cross is going to become closer and more dynamic as the weekend progresses, and yes, as we move into next week. And so Earth, what is happening down here on Earth, you see the Earth is opposition Jupiter. Now what that is telling us is that it's just telling us something we already know geocentrically, because when you have Sun conjunct Jupiter geocentrically, by definition, that is Earth opposition Jupiter. And that might give some indication of the kind of stresses that we're having to deal with at the moment. And with the Earth, opposition Jupiter, square Neptune, making that square to Mars, things can happen. And it's a time when there is a lot of stress, and it's not easy. And so I would have thought that the heliocentric picture does kind of tell us what we already know. There is a lot of tension around us, and of course at the moment that is very much focused on the Middle East. But there may be other parts of the world where we could see flare-ups, and even if there aren't actual flare-ups, it may just say something about the way people are behaving and thinking and their attitudes. And there's a lot of trapped energy, and we just want to get this energy out, but it's not always easy. So now let me move on to the 12 signs. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for the weekend of June the 21st and 22nd, 2025. Aries, you are trying to ground yourself, I think. I think that, recently there was a lot you were trying to get together, and you thought that you might be in a position to take the initiative. And perhaps over the last couple of days, while the moon was moving through your sign, you thought, this might have been your chance. But, it wasn't always easy. And you might have felt that there were real obstacles in front of you, and it just wasn't possible to move as quickly as you would have liked. And now that the moon is moving through Taurus rather than Aries, it's possible that you are starting to calm down, and you recognize that you can't do everything at once, and you've also got to think about practical matters. For example, money. I mean, money is a very boring subject, and it's particularly boring if you're the average Aries. And nonetheless, it is a good time to think about money and what you have and what you don't have. And you have got the moon conjunct Venus in Taurus, and with that conjunction, you have a chance to reconnect with something you've forgotten. And if you can be grounded and think about what is important, then Aries, I think that you can give yourself sort of real security. And it's important that you don't chase things, particularly if you chase things that are unrealistic or unreal. And the reason I'm saying that is because Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune. So Mars is your ruler. Mars is you trying to get yourself together. You are actually being quite sensible at the moment. I think you're trying to make sure that everything is in the right place, and you're doing things by the book. But Mars is quincunx Neptune, so Neptune can be a confusing influence. There seems to be something that you don't entirely understand, and you try to understand it, and you reach some conclusions, but your conclusions, might be wrong. And so, there is a possibility with this Mars quincunx Neptune that you spend a lot of time trying to make something look good, or perhaps to organize it, and it's all for nothing because you've made a false assumption. You've assumed that something was correct, and then you find out it's not correct, and you have to start again. So Aries, this weekend, it's important that you do some planning, and also that you don't allow yourself to be distracted. Though, if you want answers, if you want people to be straightforward with you, then I think that is something you can demand. And if you absolutely demand clarity, you demand that people are absolutely honest with you, then I think that you will be, given what you're looking for. And so, don't underestimate your own strength. And, as far as relationships are concerned, I've just said that the moon is making a conjunction to Venus. The moon is also making a trine to Mars. So, Venus and Mars are the two relationship planets. Mars is you, Venus might be the other person. And the moon kind of brings Venus and Mars together. The moon, makes a trine to Mars, then it makes a conjunction to Venus. And so perhaps you and someone else can have some kind of an agreement, and you can have a mutual understanding. And it might be about something completely material. It might be about money. So if you're looking for agreement about money, then I think that you can actually find that agreement. And it might be that some relationship you're in, which is not necessarily financially based, it's not about who gains what, but still money can become an issue. And by sorting out a financial matter with relative ease, you can really make things a lot easier for yourself. And finally, as the weekend continues, I think, Aries, you are going to take yourself more seriously, and you'll know that results are what matter, and also that stability matters as well. And that is a feature of the solstice, of the sun moving into Cancer. And with the sun moving into Cancer, making a square to Saturn, then I think this is a great opportunity for you, Aries, to really ground yourself and to work out what is important. It may not be fun, it may not be amusing, but you're doing the right thing. And if you give yourself real security, which is what the sun in Cancer is demanding, then it's going to be easier for you at a later stage to do fun stuff, because you'll know that your fundamental position is secure. And that means that you're able to sort of consider other initiatives, because you'll know that you're properly anchored. Taurus, things are happening, and things are happening in the sign of Taurus, because we've got the moon in Taurus, we've got Venus in Taurus, and we've still got Uranus in Taurus, just about. And with the moon and Venus in Taurus, the moon and Venus making a conjunction in Taurus, I think that this probably bodes pretty well for the weekend. I think that you're going to feel that you are at the center of things, that you understand what's happening, and also you're probably going to feel at ease with yourself. And it's always good if Taurians can feel at ease with themselves. You need comfort, and you want to know that you're in the right place, and also you want good feedback from other people. And that's a great thing about having the Moon-Venus conjunction in Taurus. There's something about you that is reassuring. And a lot of people don't feel comfortable. They feel nervous. They don't feel reassured by what is happening. And you, Taurus, can perhaps demonstrate that actually things are okay. And your words, your actions, your whole manner can be relaxing. And even if you don't feel relaxed yourself, you can emanate just a feeling of security, the idea that you actually know what you're doing. And additionally, there is a feeling that you are actually quite optimistic. You do believe that in the end things are going to be okay, and you believe it as far as you are concerned. And I think that you also can transmit this feeling. You can transmit this optimism. So perhaps your first job, Taurus, is to feel good about what you are doing. And yes, you can always have your doubts. We can never be 100% sure that everything is going to work out. But if you're honest with yourself, there is plenty of room for optimism. And if you can tell yourself that everything's going to be okay in the end, then that is something that you're going to be able to transmit to a wider audience. And so you are someone who's definitely got a role this weekend. Your role is to provide reassurance. And as far as close relationships are concerned, well, indeed any relationship is concerned, the Moon Venus conjunction in Taurus is really something very favourable. It says something about the way you present yourself, the way you communicate, what kind of vibes you give off. And I've already said that you are a reassuring person to have around. So this must mean, logically, that those who get close to you, those that are close to you, just feel good about themselves, and they feel good about you. And furthermore, the moon is making a trine to Mars, and the fact that it's making a trine to Mars and a conjunction of Venus does bring you and other people together. And perhaps there have been differences of opinion in the past, or perhaps there have been incompatibilities, but I do think that these incompatibilities can be resolved. And in the process, you can not just feel a sense of togetherness, but you can also find ways of enjoying yourself with other people. And it can be done in a way that is quite serious, but is also very productive, and most importantly is quite fulfilling. So overall, Taurus, I think that it can be a really good weekend. Gemini, you are feeling a bit cool. You're not feeling desperately emotional at the moment. I mean, it's true that Mercury is in Cancer, so you understand the emotional dimension. You understand other people's feelings. You understand that other people have strong feelings. But you don't feel especially emotional at the moment. And there might be times, Gemini, when you feel that that it's best to cut your emotions off. You don't want to give away too much. And this approach, may not be to everyone's liking. Your reluctance to reveal things about yourself, just may give the impression that you are aloof and even disinterested. And it's not about commenting on it, saying that this is good or bad. It's just the way it is. And, being a Gemini, you always have the capacity for being slightly aloof and slightly emotionally disconnected. I think it's sometimes been said that Geminis have a certain schizoid nature. And by the way, I'm a Gemini, so I think I can say this. So what does it mean to be schizoid? I don't necessarily mean that in a psychiatric sense. I mean, I don't mean it in a psychiatric sense. Being a schizoid, there can be perhaps a separation between, the mind and everything else, and the mind can work in its own way and just not want to get too involved. And when you think about the word schizoid, you think of Gemini, the twins, having two sides to their personality. But again, I must emphasize, I'm not really talking about anything medical or psychiatric here, but I just think that you just might give the impression of being quite aloof, and that you are not giving too much away. And some people do find that quite frustrating. They expect you to be more forthcoming, but you have reached you've reached the conclusion, but it's really not worth it. That there are too many risks, and if that is the way you feel, then I think it's important that you respect your own opinions and your own conclusions. There's always pressure to be emotional. People talk about emotional intelligence as if it's some kind of great virtue, but you could say that there is an over emotionality around us, and there's put too much premium is put on the value of emoting and revealing our feelings. And you as a Gemini, of all people, you know that there are limits to openness. So that's part of what is going on this weekend. And so don't try to push yourself too much in terms of the social side of things, as well as closer relationships. And you can do things on your own. You don't necessarily need anyone else's help. And also we do have the sun moving out of your sign, and it's been there for a month, and now the sun is in Cancer. And the sun in Cancer does create a change of emphasis. In fact, you could say that in longer term it possibly makes you more emotional. I mean, just because you come over as being unemotional doesn't mean you are unemotional. Deep down, your feelings are as strong as anyone else's. And with the sun moving into Cancer, you may want to hold on to those feelings, and you also have to think about what does it mean, the sign Cancer. And Cancer is quite an acquisitive sign. It wants to acquire things, and you might be aware of a certain lack, something you want, and it could be just completely material that you feel you need to have. And the sign Cancer, from a Gemini perspective, can be a sign that is connected with money and feelings about how much money you have in a bank, what kind of material possessions you have, and you might feel that you want more of something, that you just don't have enough. And if you do have that feeling, it's probably okay. Maybe you're right. Maybe there is a material lack. And if you feel a material lack, then maybe there's actually something you can do about it. Cancer, I think it could be a very good weekend, because the moon is moving through Taurus, and additionally the moon is making a conjunction to Venus, and so you are probably going to feel quite secure and also confident that you can do what you like, you can meet who you like, you don't have to feel shy, you don't have to feel any pressure. And when you are in a social situation with this moon conjunct Venus in Taurus, I think that you can really come over as someone who is actually very effective. And I think that on a social level, you'll know exactly how to behave. And additionally, you can be very empathetic. What's the word? Empathetic. You can show empathy, and you will know what people want. You'll know how to behave. You'll know how to listen, and people are going to really enjoy having you around. And so that is one side to the weekend, but it's more than that, because the sun is moving into your sign It's the Cancer season. It's starting. And for the next month, Sun moving through Cancer, and it's happening at a time when Jupiter is also in this sign. So it could be a month that may actually be very lucky for you. Now, I know that the Sun moves in through Cancer every year, but it's not every year where the Sun moves through Cancer at the same time as Jupiter is moving through Cancer. And so I do regard that as being a positive. And so, things really can work for you. And so, what is it you want to achieve this month? If there's something concrete that you want, then I think there's an excellent chance that you can actually, get hold of it. And, additionally, you have quite a high level of discipline. And this weekend, that's particularly noticeable, because what's happening is that the Sun, while moving through Cancer, is making a square to Saturn. Now, a Sun square Saturn, might be an aspect that has a rather dismal reputation. It sounds rather serious and restricting. But in your hands, the Sun Saturn square could actually be very useful. It allows you to really focus on what is important and not to be distracted. And while you can have a good time socially, there could be limits. You know that you can't spend all your time just talking to people. There are other things that need your attention. I think more on Sunday rather than Saturday. Yeah, and so as Saturday moves into Sunday, as you move into late Sunday, you might become more serious, and you might realize that there are things that you really want to do, and so that as you start thinking about the next week, you can start really streamlining yourself and making sure that you are ready for new challenges, and that you're really able to push yourself, I won't say to the limit, but just push yourself hard enough so that you have a reasonable chance of achieving your various ambitions. Leo, it's always important when the Sun changes sign. After all, the Sun is your ruler. And the Sun is changing signs from Gemini into Cancer. And you shouldn't worry too much about that. I mean, it's not a problem. But it might slow things down. I mean, if you think about it, Cancer from a Leo viewpoint is, it's the sign before your own sign. And, in astrology, it's often quite low profile. It's about, what you are keeping to yourself, and you can't be 100% honest. You can't tell people everything, and that is especially the case when the Sun is moving through Cancer. Cancer, likes to look after itself. It's often associated with hoarding, actually, the sign Cancer. What are you hoarding? Your own thoughts, your own feelings, your own plans, your own ideas, and you're trying to hold this all together, and you just know that it's not quite the right time to tell everyone what you're doing. I mean, what would happen if people were to know what your plans were, if you were a complete open book? It might be embarrassing. You might also find in a competitive situation that people take advantage of you, or, you lose your advantage. And so, it's other people who has the advantage. You've lost yours. I mean, that is a danger. Now, some of these fears might be unreasonable, but still, I think it is a good idea not to feel that you have to do everything, or rather reveal everything. And additionally, the Sun is making a square to Saturn, and this square between the Sun and Saturn, you're going to feel it this weekend and as you move into the beginning of next week, and it could actually be quite frustrating. There are things you would like to do. You feel you should have the opportunity. You were ready a few days ago, but now things have changed. And so you might have to accept that some things are going to be much more difficult than expected, or even that some things are impossible, at least at the moment. Maybe you need to wait, I don't know, maybe a month, maybe wait until until the end of July before you're really in a position to really move forward with things. And that is the nature of this square between the Sun and Saturn. And additionally, you might feel sort of frustrated that you're not being given the opportunities you feel you deserve. And those opportunities might be about new experiences. It could be about travel, excitement, that kind of thing. And so that could annoy you. But should you be annoyed? Well, possibly not. Just remember, you do not have to travel thousands of miles or even hundreds of miles to travel. Traveling can take place at any level. It can take place in the spirit. It can take place in the mind. It can take place. Well, you can look on the internet. There are pictures of everything. Everywhere has already been covered. As a tourist, you can't do anything original. You can't go anywhere original. Everything has been photographed a million times before, so there's no need for you to be worried if you can't go to anywhere, because you know what it's like, really, if you're honest with yourself. So don't allow yourself to feel physically constrained. It's a shame that you can't go to a different country, have a different experience. All the experiences that you need, are right in front of you. And maybe that is a lesson of this square between the Sun and Saturn. You can be aloof, you can be away from everything, you can be hiding yourself away, and yet it's all available to you. Everything is available to you. You don't necessarily have to talk to anyone. You don't have to take aeroplanes. It's all there. And, once you recognize that, then it's going to be much easier for you to make the most of, whatever's going on, over the next few weeks. And one other thing, when the Sun moves into Cancer, it actually starts making a conjunction to Jupiter. Jupiter is a great planet, particularly when it's in Cancer, because it's exalted in Cancer. So you can feel that something is there and something is going to look after you. And it is an opportunity, but it's an opportunity that isn't necessarily obvious. It doesn't come, bathed in light. It's not straightforward, but it's very real. And perhaps if you're looking for a lucky break, then you need to look away from the crowd. Look, right next to you. It could be staring you in the face, and you don't have to travel anywhere to find it. It just may be just about just turning around and opening your eyes. So that's something that you should be thinking about as the Sun does start making this conjunction to Jupiter. Virgo, we have a planetary situation which in the main does look pretty good. I think it's great that there's a conjunction between the Moon and Venus in Taurus, in an Earth sign. And this conjunction between the Moon and Venus is going to make you feel that really there are opportunities out there, and if you want to experience something new, you can, and you can do this in such a way that you don't take any risks at all. You can do it in such a way that you're not compromising yourself. You're not walking in a strange and alien territory where you just feel nervous. It's all there for you, and so you can feel happy. You can feel comfortable, and you can feel reasonably dynamic. After all, the moon in Taurus is making a trine to Mars, and of course Mars is moving through Virgo, and of course Virgo is your sign. So that trine between Moon and Mars is quite motivating, and you just have to make sure that you're not being distracted. You could be distracted; it is possible. Mars is making a quincunx to Neptune, so that quincunx to Neptune may be your own thoughts, your own worries, your own psychology could trip you up. But can it trip you up? Well, it could. Should it trip you up? No, it shouldn't. It doesn't have to trip you up. And, if you're, honest about your psychological state, and by the way, I'm not saying there's anything wrong with your psychological state. I think you're actually fine, but still, there can be fears that sort of bubble to the surface, and these fears could, hold you back. Maybe you're thinking too deeply about a couple of things, and if you just look at things at a surface level, that might actually be enough. So don't ask more questions than you have to, and in such a way, I think that you will make good progress. And another, big change that we've got is, it is the solstice. The solstice is when the sun moves out of Gemini into Cancer. And with the sun moving into Cancer, you're starting to think about what you want. Not what you want as in material ambitions, but rather what you want, like, in this life. What is this life all about? What are your real dreams? What are your hopes for the future? And with the sun moving into Cancer, making a conjunction to Jupiter, then I think that's something that you will be thinking about. And it may occur to you that in the past things had held you back. It could have just been that your concerns about money and material stuff had really been messing you around, and you'd been getting your priorities wrong. But now I think you can actually get your priorities right, and it's possible with the sun making a conjunction to Jupiter that you can get your priorities right with the help of other people. And perhaps you haven't been sufficiently sociable, or you've been socializing with the wrong people, and perhaps you need to mix with a different crowd, people whose attitudes are more in accord with you, and it's not about you having to trying to be someone you're not, trying to please other people. It's about finding people that are on your wavelength. And this is actually one of the challenges of Jupiter moving through Cancer. Jupiter has just gone into Cancer. Jupiter will stay in Cancer for the next year and more. And so during that time, Virgo, you do need to be thinking about other people, who you're mixing with, who you're associating with, clubs, societies, what you're a member of, and who your friends are. And a change of friends could actually be quite a good idea in certain situations. So you mustn't assume that your current company, your current social company, is all there is, because there are other people around, and perhaps you need people who have a better understanding of who you are and what you want. Libra, it's the summer solstice. At least it's the summer solstice if you're in the northern hemisphere. In the southern hemisphere, well, it is the shortest day rather than the longest day, but still, it's a solstice. And for Librans, this is important. Libra is a cardinal sign. The sun is moving into a cardinal sign. And it's also making other aspects. For example, the sun is making a square to Saturn, it's making a square to Neptune, and it's making a conjunction to Jupiter. So when the sun moves into Cancer, it's often a time of year when you feel that you can have an impact. when you might want to start to think about, what it is that you want to achieve, and you might be thinking about your ambitions and what you would like to gain, over the next few months, perhaps even over the next year. Remembering that the sun is in Cancer, but Jupiter has already gone into Cancer, and Jupiter, the planet of good luck, is going to stay in Cancer for the next year, and in fact a bit longer. So this is a time, Libra, where ideally you should really be starting to think about what it is that you want and how you want to project yourself. And as I've already suggested, it is something that happens every year, the sun moving into Cancer, but because Jupiter is moving into Cancer, so because Jupiter is already in Cancer, it gives the event added power. So it's a solstice that shouldn't just be discounted. And so, what is it? And sure, it might be the weekend when not a lot is going on, but that doesn't mean that not a lot is going on, where you are. You can make an impression, and that might mean that you want to do some planning and thinking, decide, what you want to achieve, and you can really be very effective, and you can be, quite intense about it, because we do have a conjunction between the Moon and Venus in Taurus. This Moon-Venus conjunction in Taurus is powerful. It may be something that you don't feel entirely comfortable with, but it still represents an aspect to who you are, which maybe you don't normally see, but you can be intense, and you can be serious, and you can really concentrate on what matters to you, what might existentially matter to you, why you're here, and be serious. Sometimes Librans can try their best not to be serious, to take things at a surface level, and to sort of be worrying about social niceties. But at the moment, you don't have to do that. You can get into things at a deeper level, and that relates not just to your own ambitions, but it can also be about other people and what kind of relationships you have. And a Moon conjunct Venus is suggestive of actually quite powerful, emotionally intense links with others, especially as the Moon is also making a trine to Mars. So, when the Moon moves into Taurus, makes a trine to Mars, then it moves on and it makes a conjunction to Venus. So you could say that the Moon brings Venus and Mars together. And so the Moon doing that can, give your various relationships sort of new meaning. And this might say something about an existing relationship. So if you want to intensify such a relationship, then I think you might be able to. And also it probably makes you quite attractive. And so if you're looking for a new relationship, something that really is in accord with who you are, then I think that this Moon-Venus conjunction, connected with Mars, can really help. So looking at the weekend in general, I think there's a lot going on here, and it's a weekend that you should use it, because I think that you can cover a lot of ground, and you can make progress in quite a lot of different areas. Scorpio, things are changing. We have the solstice, when the sun moves into Cancer, and sun moving into Cancer from a Scorpio view is probably a good thing. I mean, after all, you're a water sign. The sun is moving into a water sign, and so when the sun moves into Cancer, you feel better. Sun in Gemini, it wasn't great. I mean, it has to be in Gemini every year. I mean, it's the way it is. So to an extent, you're used to it, but it's better when it makes that change, all things being equal, because you start to be able to feel in a sort of a normal way, in a way that isn't necessarily too heavy, and you can afford to be more relaxed. And additionally, your feelings can be a way of moving forward. As you move forward, you have to understand what's going on in the environment, and you have different ways of sensing it all out. And obviously you've got your eyes, you've got your ears, but you've also got your feelings, and your feelings are telling you where you can go, where you can't go. And also there may be some new feelings about a changing world. And some Scorpios might actually have a sense of adventure. I mean, you can be adventurous, and it just feels safer to have adventures now with the sun in Cancer than it did when the sun was in Gemini. And also, when the sun moves into Cancer, it straight away makes a conjunction to Jupiter, and so that Sun-Jupiter conjunction could actually be quite lucky for you. And it also gives you a sense of opportunity, about being able to imagine the future, imagine your ambitions, but be able to look at your ambitions in a new way, and to really start to be aware about what is possible. And these ambitions might be material, but they certainly don't have to be. And so, if you give things a go, and if you are adventurous, then I think in many cases you are going to be rewarded. And additionally, Mars, which is of course your ruler, is making a sextile to Jupiter. That Mars sextile Jupiter is a great aspect. Mars-Jupiter contacts can sometimes be problematic because there's just too much energy going on. It just can be difficult to use that energy in a constructive way. But it's a sextile; it's not a square. And so, because of the sextile, it can be really quite a productive aspect. And you put energy into something and it works. And so if you find that something is a bit slow and you're wondering why it's not working, see what happens when you do put some energy in. And if you decide you want something, if you decide you want to have an impact, you can have an impact, and you can make things move. And also, Scorpio, as far as relationships are concerned, there is a conjunction between the moon and Venus in Taurus, your opposite sign. Additionally, the moon is making a trine to Mars, so that moon Venus Mars combination really does help you get on with people, and it allows you to be sensitive enough. And you have to recognize that other people have their approach. They have their view of the world, which is probably quite important to them. It's not a weekend for getting people to do things they don't want to do, or trying to push people around. That's not going to work. But you don't have to. And I think that there can be a great feeling of mutual respect in terms of you and other people, particularly the people you care about. And so I do think that relationships can be very motivating, and there can be plenty of common ground. And relationships can change, relationships can get stronger, they can get more intense, and maybe a friendship can become a relationship. That is possible. I mean, I suppose you could say that all friendships are relationships, but there seems to be a transition there, as something gets more intense, more powerful, and there are certain people who could have a very positive role in your life. Sagittarius, things are changing. The moon is now out of Aries, and the sun is out of Gemini. It's now in Cancer. And so, with the moon in Taurus, with the sun in Cancer, you could say, Sagittarius, that things are maybe getting more serious, and they might not be quite as easy and even fun as they used to be. And you're starting to be aware of the obligations that are in front of you, and things that used to be very straightforward may not be quite so easy, or at least quite so simple. But I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that's anything to worry about. In fact, you may adjust to the changing weather, the changing situation, quite quickly. And you will be helped by the fact that Mars is making a sextile to Jupiter. So this aspect is particularly strong on Sunday, but I think you're going to get this aspect, throughout the weekend and also into next week. And that Mars sextile Jupiter is an aspect that really is motivating. And remember, Mars is in Virgo. Mars is in a mutable sign. Mars is in a high profile sector of your chart. And so Mars may encourage you to crank things up to the next level. You have strong feelings, you have strong ambitions, and Mars is allowing you to actually find a way of harnessing it all. And so, don't think that it's just another weekend, just a weekend where you can do nothing. Sure, you can do nothing if you don't want to, if you really want to do nothing, but I think that might be a waste. There are things that you can really concentrate on, and you might be preparing for the future, and you can be serious about it. And, if you sit down and think about what is possible, and you're prepared to ask deep questions, then I think you'll be rewarded, and you might actually start to have some very powerful insights as you really start to understand what you can do. And again, that Mars sextile Jupiter really is going to help. And in general, a serious and questioning approach is the way to go. That's going to bring you the best results. And if you just remember that, and you don't get too caught up in other people's games and other people's trivia, then you shouldn't go too far wrong. Now, that might not sound very Sagittarian. You can't be a fun-loving Sagittarian all the time, and sometimes you do have to be a little more intense. And don't forget, Mars is now in Virgo. That's a serious place for Virgo, for Mars, and Mars stays in Virgo until I think the beginning of August. So now is a time for really is a time for Sagittarians to take themselves seriously and really ask yourself what would you like to achieve over the next couple of months, over the summer? Because if you're serious about it, I think that you really can get what you want. Capricorn, there is a fair amount of stuff in Earth signs. We've got the Moon and Venus in Taurus, and Uranus in Taurus. Uranus is still in Taurus. It leaves Taurus, moves into Gemini, I think, on July the 7th. And we've got Mars in Virgo. So with that emphasis on Earth signs, 3 personal planets in Earth signs, you're going to feel that. And I think that you're going to feel that in a way that is really very constructive and actually quite motivating. And if you look at the chart, you can see that there's nothing in Capricorn. That, by the way, I shouldn't really have that in this chart. It shows the part of fortune. I don't want to show I don't really need to show the part of fortune, because this is a very general chart, and I'm certainly not using times. So some people ask, what is that thing? Why have you put the part of fortune in? And the reason I put the part of fortune is it's just a mistake. I shouldn't have put it in there. In fact, I can, if you want, take the part of fortune out. Just to make things really really straightforward. So if we we can, there it is, it's gone. So you don't have to worry about the part of fortune. The reason I'm doing that is to emphasize the fact that Capricorn is an empty sign, but although it's an empty sign, Venus and the Moon are making a trine aspect to Capricorn, and also Mars is making a trine to it as well. And so I do think that could be very energizing, and you may find over the weekend that things actually move very quickly, faster than expected, and you're perhaps going to be helped by other people, remembering that it is the solstice. The sun has gone into Cancer, and so sun going into Cancer, that means the sun moving into your opposite sign, and Cancer is a sign in the Capricorn horoscope, but is often connected with relationships and with other people. And the sun is making a conjunction to Jupiter, so don't feel that you have to do everything on your own. And in fact, over the next few weeks, you should be making a special effort to understand, what people can do for you. In fact, it's not just next couple of weeks. Yeah, it's next couple of weeks, next month. The sun is moving through Cancer, but Jupiter's going to be in Cancer for the next year. And so, with the sun, starting to make a conjunction to Jupiter, you're in a position where you really can benefit from other people's input, and you should find that things really move quite quickly. And don't allow passing stubbornness to hold you back. Sure, Saturn is in Aries, and Saturn is your ruler, and you could say, well, Saturn in Aries, well, that encourages you to just stay exactly where you are. Well, you can focus on one particular place, for example, your home, but that's not the be-all and end-all. You have to think about other things going on, and you should be welcoming variety, and particularly this kind of variety, because the changes that are going on over the weekend are changes that you are absolutely able to handle. You can deal with it, and most importantly, you can enjoy yourself. And furthermore, Moon-Venus conjunction, that's a very friendly conjunction, relationship-orientated conjunction, and with the sun also moving into your opposite sign, I think that you can really, enjoy other people's company. So, looking at things overall, Capricorn, I think it could be, a really good weekend where you can enjoy yourself, and you can also feel that you're doing something useful, and you're going to be helped along by the universe. The universe is on your side. It wants things to move, and if you're ready to make those moves, it can all happen for you. Aquarius, there's kind of a lot of things going on. I mean, it is the solstice when the sun moves out of Gemini into Cancer, and sun moving into Cancer. Is that really what you wanted? Well, it's inevitable, isn't it? I mean, the sun has to go into Cancer, and this is when it does go into Cancer. It happens every year around this time. But, when the sun goes into Cancer, things aren't always 100% easy, because, Cancer and Aquarius are very different signs. And so, when the sun moves into Cancer, particularly when Jupiter is in Cancer as well. So when this happens, you might just be aware that actually there are things that you can't avoid, things that you have to worry about, and maybe there are unfinished tasks, things that you had been postponing endlessly, and you perhaps were able to get away with postponing it. But there comes a time when you've got to stop running and you've got to look at actually what needs to be done, and you can really get going on it. And I think you can be quite good at it. I think you can be very effective. So this weekend, think about what needs to be finished. And you might think that there's no point. Perhaps you are involved in something, or you were involved in something, or you started something months ago, maybe in the winter. Okay, in the Northern Hemisphere. But just because it was months ago doesn't mean that it's all over, that you've lost your chance. Time. It's true. Time goes quickly, and you don't reply to something, and you think you're going to reply, and then you don't reply, and you feel you've lost the plot, and you've lost your chance. And I'm afraid that's something that happens to me all the time. And there is that feeling that you can't go back, that you have missed a chance, but you shouldn't feel that way. And it just may be that there's something that you left half finished a long, long time ago, and now it's time to finish it off. And there is a point. And with the Sun moving into Cancer, making that conjunction to Jupiter, I really do think it is a time when you can really get going on it. Now, as far as relationships are concerned, I have to say that there is a square between the Sun and Saturn. And the Sun is ruler of Leo, and Leo is your opposite sign. Of course, Saturn is ruler of Aquarius. So that Sun square Saturn might indicate that you and someone else don't entirely get on. And there might be a bit of bad feeling. William Lilly in Christian Astrology, when he describes the difference between a square and an opposition, he says that a square is perfect enmity and an opposition is perfect hatred. I mean, that might be an exaggeration, but when you've got Sun square Saturn, there is something about your relationship with another person which isn't entirely easy. But it's not an opposition. It's not an absolute disaster. There is something that can be done about it. It's not the absolute end of the world. And it may just be that you have to be very focused. At the moment, you understand the concept of obligation. And if you really want to get back in touch with someone, if you want to restore a relationship for whatever reason, I think you can. And it's just about working out what steps are required. And if you think about it, you understand exactly what needs to be done. And so perhaps there's no reason to fall out with anyone. If you're just prepared to put in the effort, put in the work, and it just might be a few simple steps can resolve some of the issues that are represented by that Sun Saturn square. So that is part of the message of this weekend. Don't give up on anything, and don't give up on any person, because however bad things are, it does seem that things can be salvaged or perhaps even restored to their former glories. Pisces, it's the solstice. Sun is moving into Cancer. Sun is moving into a water sign. You're a Pisces, you're a water sign. So Sun moving into Cancer is something which looks really good for you. And remember that Jupiter is already in Cancer. You've already started to feel the benefits, hopefully, of Jupiter being in Cancer. Remember, Jupiter is your ruler, and Jupiter, in Cancer, it's in the sign of its exaltation. And so, with Jupiter in Cancer, you are hopefully starting to understand, what you can do, what it is possible for you to do. And you're still at the very early stages. Jupiter's in Cancer for the next year. In fact, I think it leaves Cancer at the end of June of next year. So for over a year still. And so now that the sun is moving into Cancer, I think you get a boost, and you start to think about all the things you can do, and perhaps this weekend you need to really start to get going on them. And I think you can make a powerful impression, and people will pay attention to you, and they'll pay attention in a positive way. They'll see that you are someone who is substantial, and you're also someone who is able to make things happen, and there's something about you that actually is quite exciting. And so don't feel that nothing's going on this weekend. And additionally, with the sun moving, with the sun, when the sun moves into Cancer, it's really important that you think about things from a really positive angle. If there is something you want to do which is an integral part of who you are, then it is important that you do it, and that you don't create excuses. You might think, oh, you haven't got the resources, you haven't got the money. If something is important to you and it is an integral part of yourself, then you don't need the money. Money is just a shortcut. Sometimes money is just a way of just making something happen quickly. But you don't need money. You can do the preparations on your own, in your own way, and it needn't cost you anything. So you could then say that money is a red herring, and it's just an excuse why you can't do something. And this is a time when there are indeed lots of things that you can do. And also this weekend, we have a conjunction between the moon and Venus. Venus is in great shape. I mean, Venus is in Taurus. It's in its own sign, and in a way, Venus has a relationship to Pisces because Venus is exalted in Pisces, and so with the moon making a conjunction to Venus, then I think that you're very much able to express yourself, and you're able to express yourself in a way that is actually quite soothing. People will like the way you use words, they'll like the way you present yourself, they'll like the way you just move. And so Pisces, it's a great opportunity to ingratiate yourself with people, and you make it quite clear that you are there, and you're not there to make demands. You're not a heavy influence. You're not someone who's going to make things difficult for anyone. You're just there actually to make things easy, and you're actually quite tolerant, easygoing, and at the same time, you can be relied on, and you do have a power to you, which I think is really going to be appreciated. And those are my forecasts of the 12 signs, and it's now time to look at things from the viewpoint of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is the weekend going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was waiting, number 5. So with waiting, we get the idea that something is supposed to happen in the end. But right now, you feel as if you're just waiting. And sooner or later, you're going to have to do something, or that something has to happen. But you're not ready yet. And that might feel itself to be, the perfect place to be, because there's no pressure on you. But I think that would be an illusion to think there is no pressure, because in the end, you're going to have to take the plunge. But the question is, when do you take the plunge? And, how long do you wait for? And waiting can sometimes be difficult because, you think it's just a question of waiting, but you don't realize that other things are going on, or you may have made promises to other people, or you may have made promises to yourself, and actually other people could be waiting for you, and you think you're waiting for them, and then suddenly someone gets annoyed. What are you doing? You were supposed to be doing this and you're not. Well, what's going on? So you cannot wait forever. And that might be the message of this hexagram. And this hexagram does have a moving line, and it is the top line that moves. So when you're talking about the I Ching and each hexagram, there is a sequence for every hexagram. Each hexagram is made up of 6 lines, and as far as I can see, the top line represents the end, the final sequence, the final part of the sequence, and it does perhaps indicate that you have waited so long that someone comes to get you. Now that's one interpretation of it. Another interpretation of it is sort of more negative. It's saying you've fallen in a pit and you're not in a great position. And what are you waiting for? Well, you're waiting to get out of a pit and you're stuck. But it does say, kind of strangely, it talks about people turning up, 3 guests showing up. And that might be 3 guests showing up to help you out of a pit. And your first impression when someone comes to help is negative. You think, well, who are you? What are you doing? And you might find that a person who you think is a negative could actually be a real positive. Now that's one way of looking at it. But yeah, the other way is you've waited so long, someone comes to get you, and then you've got to decide what to do. So don't hang on forever. And I think that is really the message of this hexagram. Now, we've got a top line moving. So because we've got a top line moving, that means we move to a second hexagram. And the hexagram we move to is hexagram number 9, which is the taming power of the small. And this is perhaps an extension of the previous hexagram. The previous hexagram was about waiting. And we're ready kind of to do something, to take the plunge. But the taming power of a small is something taming us. It's kind of restricting us. And it's saying, well, are you ready? Maybe you're not ready. And we have all these impulses. There are things we'd like to do. And these things we'd like to do may in themselves be pretty unimportant, but we can't really help ourselves. But the taming power of a small is about control and accepting that maybe we were right all along. I've said that we might have waited too long, but maybe we didn't wait too long, because one of the images one of the ideas about this hexagram, taming power of a small, it's a very common theme in I Ching, is dense clouds, no rain. So the clouds are dense. They are almost sort of imminently, going to create the downpour, but it doesn't actually happen. And so that might be part of what we're dealing with, the taming power of the small. And just we shouldn't feel that we have to do anything, not yet. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be pressured. And maybe we were right. Maybe we should have just waited this thing out. And we don't necessarily have to give in to external pressure. If someone says, what are you doing? Get on with it. You don't necessarily have to say, don't have to actually say anything. We don't have to commit to anything. And maybe that's what the weekend is about. We're just not ready. And whatever we're waiting for, that moment, it has to arrive at some stage, but we have to get the moment right. And we shouldn't allow ourselves to be pushed around. I mean, that is my interpretation of it. I think my interpretation could be questioned, but I'm just trying to bring together those 2 hexagrams of on one hand waiting, with the taming power of the small. And the taming power of the small really does indicate that we shouldn't actually take on too much. And now I want to finish by looking at the solstice. And so let's look at the chart of the solstice. And so here is the moment it happens on Saturday, June the 21st at 3:42 a.m. London time. So that means that if you're in East Coast, New York, for example, that means it's going to happen at 10:42 p.m. East Coast. If you're in California, it would be at 10:42. That would be 7:42 a.m. And if you're in Paris, then that would be, or Berlin or Rome, that would be 4:42 a.m. And if you're in Australia or New Zealand, that would be later on Saturday. That would be, I don't know, something like the afternoon of Saturday, when the precise moment when the sun moves into Cancer. And the solstice, okay, we know what it means astronomically. It is the point where the sun is at its highest in the northern hemisphere, and it is the longest day, and it is a precise moment. It's not just some general time around June the 21st. It's a precise moment, and it's a moment of power. And it doesn't matter whether you're northern hemisphere, south hemisphere. It is a moment of power, the solstice point. And you could argue with the solstice, it's a gateway. It's a gateway for the cosmos. At that precise moment, the Earth gets imprinted, and you might, for example, say that whatever's going on in the skies at the time of the solstice, that says something about the next 3 months until the autumnal equinox. Well, the autumnal equinox from a northern hemisphere viewpoint. And so it is important. It can be important from a spiritual perspective. If you're into rituals and you want to mark this equinox, you can't just do it on some random day. I remember long ago in the early 80s, I remember going to Stonehenge. There was a music festival at Stonehenge. It always had Hawkwind at Stonehenge, and that was that was a highlight, and it was a free festival, and it was quite an impressive thing, Stonehenge. And that was a time, if you go to the Stonehenge now, it's all cordoned off, and you don't really have contact with the stones. But in the early 80s, the stones were available, and you could go to the stones. Of course, people were misusing the stone. People were climbing on top of them, which is, of course, why it's more restricted. But the Druids would have their I think the Druids would have their festivals around. They'd have some ceremony around the time of the solstice. But the thing is, the solstice is at a precise moment. It's not at a matter of convenience. And if you want to celebrate the solstice, you arguably should do it, not necessarily at dawn on the 21st. You should, whenever the nearest dawn is, you should do it at that precise moment. And that may or may not be convenient. So, for example, if you are in California this year, it is incredibly convenient. It's at 7:42 p.m. on Friday. I mean, that's easy. It's after most people have come home from work, and it's before they've gone to bed. It's great. On the other hand, if you are in London, it's at 3:42 a.m. or if you're in Paris it's at 4:42 a.m. So if you're in London, 3:42 a.m., that's when you've got to get up. So that's when you've got to be there at 3:42 a.m. because that is the moment of power. If you look at it from a spiritual, ritualistic viewpoint, that is that split second when the gateway is open. Now, as far as this particular solstice is concerned, why are we looking at it? Well, the theory is that it might say something about the next few months, and you can set the solstice chart for different locations. But let's first look at the broad message of this solstice chart. And you could argue that the solstice chart is quite heavy. And, the reason is that, we have just had Jupiter square Saturn. We've also had Jupiter square Neptune in early cardinal signs. So looking at this solstice chart, let's forget about the house casts for the moment. But and we have got the Sun at 0 degrees Cancer. It is square Saturn. It is square Neptune, and it is semi-square Venus. So these planets, and Venus is of course semi-square Saturn and Neptune. So the Saturn and the Neptune really do dominate this solstice. And remember, Saturn's in Aries. Saturn's fallen in Aries, and so it could be tough. There may be a lot of fear and restriction with this solstice. This might be what the solstice is all about. To give you an example, I've been looking at sort of lots of YouTube videos about what's going on with between Israel and Iran, and is the US going to do a strike on Iran? Is the US going to support Israel? And a lot of people, a lot of serious commentators are showing real fear about this. Does the US want to be at war? But there may be other things to be afraid about. Depends who you are, depends what society you're living in. There are things to be worried about. It could be the economy. It could be some other war you're involved in if you're living in Russia or if you're living in Ukraine. Or maybe if you're living in Sudan. We don't pay enough attention to Sudan. There's been terrible things going on in Sudan. Something like 500,000 children killed or died during the civil war in Sudan. So it depends where you are, but there's always something to worry about, something to be afraid of. And I think this may be what this Sun square Saturn is about. And it's not just Sun square Saturn, it's Sun square Neptune. So as the Sun moves into Cancer, it is aspecting Saturn and Neptune. So I do think in general it is a difficult time. It's not easy. And if we want to look at the solstice from the viewpoint of the 90-degree dial, here we go. So there is the solstice because the Sun is on the 90, and that's showing that the Sun is on the solstice point, and it is making a semi-square to Venus, and that's why on the 90-degree dial Venus is opposition the Sun. And we can see some of the midpoints that this connects with, and you can see that Saturn, by definition, Saturn is is relatively close to the solstice point at the moment, or rather to the Aries point. So we can see that the Saturn influence. Saturn is obviously on the Aries Saturn midpoint, obviously by definition almost, because the Sun and the Aries. The Sun at the time of the solstice, by definition, is going to be exactly square the Aries point, and it's also relatively close to the Moon Uranus midpoint, and so that is stirring things, really starting to stir things up. The Moon Uranus, it's a time of instability. Maybe the people are restless. the people out there, the crowds, the mob is restless. They're not happy with the way things are going, regardless of where they are, what country they live in. And there you can see the Sun and the Aries point are on the on the Moon Uranus midpoint. And also we've got, it's on the Zeus Admetos midpoint. So Zeus is the planet of force, and Admetos is a planet of delay. And so people are thinking about force, but can they actually go through with it? I mean, let's see what Alfred Witter says about the Sun on the Zeus Admetos midpoint. I can just give you a view just off the top of my head, but Zeus and Admetos, this gives the principle of first beginnings, the act of originating. All beginning is difficult to form, to work on, to shape, to form raw materials. And so, so Aries on the Zeus midpoint, which of course we've got Aries on the square, the solstice point. So Aries on the Zeus Admetos midpoint, to face new problems in general, a new beginning, new environment, new circumstances. Or the Sun on this is to be adaptable, days on which the surroundings show a completely new face. So he does talk about change. That's not something I would have picked up immediately. But there are certainly maybe these difficulties give way to change. But I think you can also see Admetos as a planet of violence, of force, of explosive energy, but linked to Admetos, somehow holding it back. And maybe that's what Donald Trump is feeling at the moment, with his hesitation about whether or not to attack Iran. He can see the downside. His base are not too into the idea of America getting involved in a foreign war. Now, we can look at this solstice point, the Sun crossing the precise moment when the Sun moves into Gemini. We can look at it from the viewpoint of astrocartography, just to see if there are any areas that really stand out. And so, if we look at the Astro map for the solstice, now I should say the Astro map, as I like to always say, it is hit and miss. It theoretically shows what parts of the world might be impacted by the solstice, but in practice it doesn't always work. So do bear that in mind when we look at this map. So what we're looking for is places where there is perhaps emphasis. So, for example, here is all the places where Uranus is on the IC at the exact time of the solstice. And you can see that this goes right through the eastern United States, possibly through Washington, D.C. And this yellow line here is all the places where the Sun and Jupiter are rising at the exact time of the solstice. And so I don't know whether you can see that. Let me just move this bit. So you can actually see that this potentially goes through Israel. And so, what does this mean for Israel? I'll be thinking about that in a moment. And then we've got this double red line here. This double red line is all the places where Saturn and Neptune are on the midheaven, and that double red line does go through Tehran, the capital of Iran. So let's just have a look at those charts or those points in detail. So let's start by looking at the solstice relocated for Washington, D.C. So this is a Washington, D.C. solstice. it continues to be set for London time. So this isn't this is 3:42 a.m. London time, but reset for Washington DC, just in case that doesn't make any sense. And so set for Washington DC at the time of the solstice, Pluto is on the ascendant and Uranus is on the IC. Uranus, okay, it's not exactly on the IC, but it's close enough. And this might indicate that this solstice is a destabilizing influence in the United States, because Washington, D.C. is the capital. And Pluto is on the ascendant, so there is a drama there. And that might be about how the United States is trying to present itself, sort of perhaps powerful, or there's a certain sense of change and sort of transformation here. But is Pluto in Aquarius? Where does it actually move? Where is the change? And Uranus is on the IC, so that may say something about what's going on in America. How comfortable the people in America feel about their country, and there seems to be a level of dissatisfaction here, and something is threatening to erupt. And so that's Washington D.C. I'm not saying this because I'm trying to be negative about America. I'm just using this as just one place, and there are other places to be looking at. And another place to look at is if we set the solstice for Jerusalem, the capital of Israel, and if we set the solstice for Jerusalem, if you are someone who is supportive of Israel's war against Iran. It is a war, I think, at this stage, isn't it? You might look at that chart and you might find that actually to be quite encouraging. And because there's a Sun-Jupiter conjunction, and Jupiter is exactly on the ascendant at the time of the solstice in Tel Aviv, and Jupiter is in its exaltation, and we've got 0 degrees 47 Cancer rising. So that could indicate on its own that things may not be so bad for Israel, that they may have some success in their war against Iran. I'm not saying it is the case. I'm just looking at the chart. You can read it how you like. I've said that I think that astrocartography can be quite hit and miss, and I do think this war is quite dangerous. And one has to look at other things. One can't just look at one solstice chart, but you can reach your own conclusions. I'm not going to try to say how that chart is going to definitely work out, but I think it has to be pointed out that at the time of the solstice, Jupiter, a very fortunate Jupiter, is conjunct the ascendant. Although you might argue that Jupiter is combust, you might, and that the Sun in some ways is weakening Jupiter. But I think in this case the Jupiter rising does look pretty good. And by contrast, if we set that chart for Tehran, it's not a pretty picture. So this is a solstice set for Tehran, and Saturn and Neptune are exactly on the midheaven. And so the midheaven is the government. The government are under a huge amount of pressure, and it's not a fortunate sign. It's not a fortunate omen. Although you might say that Saturn is not as bad as it seems. It might seem to be fallen in Aries, but it's above the horizon, and it's because it's a daytime chart. It's a masculine planet in a masculine sign in Aries, and it's above the horizon, and it's a daytime planet, Saturn. And so, although Saturn is fallen, you could look at it in another way and say, oh well, actually it's not such a bad position because it's kind of in the right place, and so maybe that's not so bad. But I still think that Saturn on the midheaven, things do look a bit difficult here for those in charge of Iran. And so now I just want to just quickly look at a few people who might be influenced by the solstice, and I do want to look at a couple of countries. I just want to start off by looking at a few people. I mean, people I have talked about these people before, so I'm not gonna spend any time on them. Just very quickly. Sergei Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister. He has well, we don't know where his sun is, but he was born very, very close to because I don't know his time of birth. He was born very close to the spring equinox on March 21st. His sun may be in Pisces, it may be in Aries, and so this solstice point is right on his square his sun, and he does have Saturn conjunct his sun at the moment. So you can imagine, if you're Russia's chief diplomat, you've kind of got your work cut out for you at the moment. I mean, he is renowned as being a very talented diplomat, but there may be particular pressures he has to deal with in his role as foreign minister as a result of the solstice. And the Argentine president, Javier Milei, has his Mars at 1 degree 141 Libra, and so he's got, at the time of his solstice, he's got the sun square his Mars, and he's going to have Saturn and Neptune opposition his Mars. So Javier Milei, I know he comes over as being a very confident, dynamic person, but with Javier Milei having Saturn and Neptune opposition his Mars, one just does wonder what is going on in Argentina. Are things going fine for him? How's he doing with the economy? People say a lot of good things about what's going on in Argentina. I mean, maybe that just represents the YouTube channels I look at. I'm not a libertarian. I wouldn't have said I'm a libertarian. I'm not particularly right-wing, not really, but I just find myself looking at channels which seem to be quite favourably disposed towards Javier Milei. But maybe there are things going on behind the scenes which Javier Milei is not telling us about, or we don't know about it, because it's difficult to keep touch with what is going on in Argentina on a sort of a daily basis. And someone else Again, I don't know anything about her, but it's this French politician who used to be in the news a lot when she was a candidate to be prime minister, but Mitterrand decided not to appoint her, and apparently she's important, and she's got her ascendant at 1 degree Libra, Lucie Castex. And so that means that she's got the Saturn-Neptune conjunction right on her ascendant, and she's got right on her Jupiter. So that may say something about her enemies, but she's also got the Sun and Jupiter on her midheaven. So I'm wondering politically what she is doing. Again, I don't follow French politics on a daily basis. Even if I tried, I wouldn't be very successful at it. But maybe she's planning something, doing something. Maybe there are attempts to push her into the limelight, so she might be someone to watch. Plus, she needs to watch out for her enemies with Jupiter and Neptune, with Saturn and Neptune on her descendant. But it may say something about her private life, may say nothing about her political life, having Saturn and Neptune on her descendant. And then we have Candice Owens. I mean, she's obviously a woman who's always got something to say for herself. I mean, so Candice Owens is, a prolific YouTube commentator. She's on the right, and she's got her Mars at 0 degrees 16 Cancer and 0 degrees 18 Cancer. I don't have her time of birth, so I suppose it might be possible that her Mars is in Gemini if she was born right at the beginning of the day, but I think that's unlikely. I think she's got her Mars at around 0 degrees Cancer, so this solstice is really hitting her Mars. She's got Saturn square her Mars, Neptune square her Mars, and that might encourage her to do something, say something. I mean, she's always trying to be, or at least succeeding in being, certainly being vocal, and she can be quite outrageous in some of her opinions. And so there may be stuff for her to get annoyed about. Maybe she can, take advantage of this, having the Sun and Jupiter conjunct her Mars. And finally, moving to Germany, Alice Weidel, who's, I think, co-head of the AfD, the sort of right-wing party in Germany. She has got her Venus at 1 degree 15 Capricorn. So she's going to have the solstice opposition her Venus. Venus is going to be an important planet to her. She's a woman. Obviously, she's unlikely to be projecting her Venus. Again, I don't have a time of birth for her. So Venus is about how she presents herself, maybe about her as a politician and her public. And so she might feel it. Is she going to feel it in such a way that the newspapers and the news sites notice? I don't know. And then there are, a few countries that might be affected by the solstice. One possible country might be Slovakia. I do look at Slovakia sort of every now and then. So I take this as a possible chart for Slovakia, which is maybe controversial, but I do think that the Slovak national uprising in 1944 is a chart one can use for Slovakia. It's not the only chart. But it's a chart, particularly if you're on the left in Slovakia, it's a very important moment for Slovak national uprising. If you're on the nationalist right, you might, of course, choose the moment that Slovakia split from Czechoslovakia and became a puppet of Hitler's Germany. That's another chart you could use, or you could simply use the chart when Czechoslovakia and Slovakia split, when the Czech Republic and Slovakia split on January the 1st, 1993. But in terms of the Slovak national uprising chart, you do have Mars at 0 degrees Libra. So at the moment, that Mars receives an opposition aspect from Saturn, and an opposition aspect from Neptune, and a square from the Sun, and a square from Jupiter. So that Mars is perhaps about Slovakia's enemies, particularly the enemies of maybe the Prime Minister, Robert Fico. I mean, Robert Fico, being on the left, is probably someone who quite strongly associates with this chart, with the Slovak national uprising. And Slovakia's enemies would be potentially the European Union, everyone that wants to get rid of Fico, because he has been quite controversial in standing up against sanctions against Russia, and he wants to maintain good relations with the country, and that, of course, has made him vulnerable and has made his government vulnerable, and so he perhaps needs to watch out as a result of this solstice, because it does hit the Slovak national uprising's Mars. And of course, the Slovak uprising was not a success in the end. I mean, it was a heroic action, but in the end, the Germans won, and Germany, perhaps as a representative of a united Europe, and so will, in the early 40s, and so perhaps we could see similar problems now. Slovakia's independence is perhaps being threatened, and I'm sure there are plenty of people in Europe who want to bring Fico down. And another pair of countries that could be impacted, who came into being at very similar times, were India and Pakistan. So Pakistan, August the 14th, 1947, has its Mars at 0 degrees Cancer. India also has its Mars at 0 degrees. Where's India's Mars? 0 degrees Cancer. So, in fact, India and Pakistan both have their Venuses at 15 degrees Leo. So Mars, Venus, semi-square. And so the solstice is hitting India and it's hitting Pakistan, because what hits one hits the other. And additionally, of course, we know that both countries have Saturn square their Mars, and Saturn will go retrograde and will go back hitting at Mars again. So it's possible that this solstice could rekindle tensions between India and Pakistan. I think they have sort of calmed down, over the last few weeks, but maybe there will be renewed tension, as a result of the solstice. And finally, there's Britain and America. So here's a chart for the Starmer regime when Keir Starmer came to power. I've looked at this chart again before, but just a reminder, if I've got this right, 12:15 p.m. on July the 5th, when Starmer became Prime Minister, the ascendant was at 1 degree 48. Libra, and the midheaven was at 2:20 Cancer. So the solstice the sun is exactly on the midheaven, and the sun is exactly on the midheaven, and Saturn and Neptune are on the descendant. So this solstice is going to probably be quite a significant event for Starmer and his government. Now, you could be positive about it and say, well, Jupiter's on the midheaven, maybe that will be useful. But then Saturn's on the descendant, and Saturn represents the government's enemies. And I would have thought that having a Sun square Saturn and really Sun square Neptune at the same time, hitting the descendant, may not be easy. And finally, there is the United States. And here is the chart for the United States. And assuming we have the time right for the United States, 5:10 p.m., that's the time that most astrologers seem to use for the US, we have an IC at 1-3 Aries. So the midheaven is 1-3 Libra. We've got the IC at 1-3 Aries. Saturn is on the IC of the US. Neptune is on the IC, and with the solstice, it's all been triggered. So the sun is square the MC-IC axis, and Venus is making a semi-square sesquiquadrate to it. So I think the solstice is going to stir things up, and we shouldn't forget that if we set the solstice chart up for Washington DC, Uranus is on the IC, so we're getting a sort of IC emphasis here. The foundations of the country are being undermined. It's not a country that is necessarily feeling particularly comfortable with itself at the moment, but I'm not singling America, United States out. I think a lot of countries in the world are not feeling comfortable with themselves, and maybe this solstice is not going to help, especially as the fact that, one of the big features of the solstice is the fact that the sun is indeed making a square to Saturn. So it is a solstice square Saturn square Neptune. Anyway, that's all I'm going to say on the solstice. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did enjoy this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. If you want to buy me a coffee, there's a link in the description. And I will talk to you again very soon.